4 Steps to Getting Started with Schema with Jonny Ross. In Search SEO podcast is brought to you by Rank Ranger, the all-in-one SEO platform that helps scale your business through data and analytics. Hey, it's David. Is Schema an active part of your SEO strategy? Maybe it's something that you were involved with a couple of years ago when you were setting up a new website, but you haven't thought of it much since. In this episode 100 of the In Search SEO podcast, we're going to be looking at what works effectively in Schema right now. And if you're not actively using Schema, we'll share 4 steps to getting started with Schema right now. Joining me today is a marketing consultant and fractional CMO who helps companies hone their in-house digital marketing skills. He's a speaker, blogger, podcaster, an all-round cool guy. Welcome to the founder of Fleet Marketing, Jonny Ross.
Thanks. Great to be here. Really excited. And the fact that it's your 100th episode, I mean, that is, I'm pumped up about that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that, Jonny, episode number 100, no pressure, but this has got to be excellent. Let me just say, you can find Jonny over at fleek.marketing. So, Jonny, has Schema changed much over the last couple of years?
Well, I think the awareness of Schema has hugely changed, but the fundamentals of Schema, probably hasn't changed hugely. It's a language, but there's been much more buy-in from the likes of Google, and it's clear that it makes a very big difference in terms of ranks. Although, having been on a podcast only yesterday talking about this, there is contention around whether, some of the SEO community believing whether Schema has a positive impact on ranks or not. And Search Engine Journal are saying that it doesn't. However, I strongly believe it does.
So what are there reasons for saying that it doesn't?
Good question. And it was just that there was no categoric proof that there was a direct link, correlation even, and that for me, we all know that SEO is difficult. There's so many different things that add up to make a difference, and the thing I suggest is apply common sense. How can it not make it better? You are adding a whole layer of trust, a whole level of detail. You're entering data into the right parts in Google's database. How can it not, from a common sense point of view?
Indeed. If something isn't measurable, does it exist? So today you're sharing your top 4 steps on how to get started with Schema. So that starts off with number 1, identify the opportunity.
Yeah, sure. So this is about understanding your website first of all. So understanding the structure of it, the different content you've got, all the different aspects of the website, and then considering the different types of schema and how you can use those across the different areas of the website. So, from the really basic level, it's around, well, okay, are we an organization or are we a local business? Now, if you're a dentist, for example, there is Schema for dentists. And it amazes me that I would suggest 80% of dentists still are not using dentistry Schema. And that's an ability to be able to say to Google, look, we're officially a dentist. Why wouldn't you be using it? So the first thing is deciding, looking at local business versus organization. Do I fall into any of the subcategories within there, or do I just choose one or the other and go with that? And that's about marking up things like your logo, things like your address, your company name, all that sort of stuff. But then the next level of detail is understanding all the different types of content you've got. So whether it be articles or blogs, or perhaps you've got things like recipes or events on your website, or maybe even job listings. All of these things can be marked up. So it's about identifying the different pieces of content, understanding all the different types of schema that are available, and thinking, okay, well, those are the different things that I could use. For example, even FAQ schema, and making sure that you've got questions and answers on some of your key pillar pages, marking them up using FAQ schema.
Sticking with a dentist example, if you're a dentist and you mark up your page with Schema, where is Google going to use that information? Are we talking about giving you greater prominence in something like Google Maps or something else?
Yeah, that's the theory. Absolutely. If you're searching for a dentist and Google's aware of a number of different websites, and some of them are using Schema and some of them are using dentistry Schema, isn't that common sense? Isn't that more obvious that they are definitely a dentist compared to some of the others that, perhaps they're not 100% sure about? We're talking about robots understanding content here, aren't we?
And point number 2, step number 2 is implementation. So are we talking about simply marking up your most important pages with Schema, or is implementation something else here?
Well, it's how to. I guess the real key here is how to do it. So I think there's 3 options in how you implement Schema. You've got sort of an old-fashioned way, which is hard code. So that's about wrapping Schema around content, literally in the code of the website. The other option you've got is using plugins. So there's a lot of plugins available. Some of them are great, some of them aren't. Depending on the website, you might not even be using WordPress, but there's certainly Shopify plugins as well, and Drupal plugins and Joomla plugins. But depending on how your website's been built and the theme, depends on which plugins work, and et cetera, et cetera. So it's difficult to recommend the best one, but certainly that sort of second option is to use plugins to implement Schema. The third option, which I'm hugely favouring, and perhaps a mixture of option 2 and 3 to be fair, but the third option is using tools like WordLift and InLinks. And InLinks is my absolutely favourite tool at the moment. I just love it. And it's basically a bit of JavaScript, add it to the website, and that enables the code to be layered on top of the website, but loaded immediately at the same time that the website's loaded. So that makes it a lot easier. Imagine it a bit like Google Tag Manager. So it's the ability to be able to apply Schema on top of the website, and for Google to be able to understand that. So that's what implementation is all about.
Wonderful. I love that. Great overview there, and great recommendation for that tool in links there as well. What if someone is using a WordPress site, for example? So WordPress is still a very, very common CMS to be using. Is there a particular WordPress plugin that you would recommend as well? Yeah,
well, this was what I was sort of insinuating is difficult, because it depends on the theme that you've got. It depends how WordPress has been built as to what plugins work and what conflicts. And I must admit that, having tried many of them, it really does depend on the site as to which one's the best. I'm really loving, in terms of SEO plugins though, I'm really loving Rank Math at the moment. And whilst Yoast is certainly delivering a lot at the moment and really building more into the plugin, Rank Math I think is overtaking, and there's an element of Schema that you can apply through Rank Math. But yeah, it's difficult to pinpoint. I avoid recommending a particular plugin because some of them just do not work on certain WordPress sites.
So do you mean not work in terms of not injecting the schema correctly on the web page?
Yeah, they can conflict, and one of the biggest issues you've got is that if you implement it incorrectly, you end up marking up the wrong parts of the content,
right,
and that's when you can cause bigger issues. So it's around making sure. Well, in fact, that takes us to step 3, I guess. But it's around making sure that you implement it correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Understood. Okay, so essentially, what you're trying to say is, don't just use a plugin or a third-party tool and then assume that it's doing the job correctly. You have to get in there and check your source code.
Absolutely.
Number 3. Yeah, verify the implementation then.
Yeah, leads us very nicely to number 3, doesn't it? And number 3 is all about verifying the implementation. And there's a couple of really simple ways that you can do that. So there's a validator tool that Schema has, and all you do is, if you Google Schema validator, you'll get to it very quickly. Input the URL of the page that you've injected Schema into, and very quickly that will show you what schema is on that page, what rich data there is available on that page. But the great thing about it is it will highlight any errors as well. So it'll highlight where you're missing properties, or perhaps there's an invalid data in a particular property. The other thing to bear in mind here, and this is sort of part of step 2 and step 3, is that Google has a number of guides on implementing schema. So for example, FAQ page schema job posting schema. It's absolutely worth reading their guides because they've got some specific stuff about the best ways to implement. And then when it comes to validating, you can then check on Google's guidelines in terms of the properties of each one that they need. So, for example, a job has to have a salary, as an example, marked up. Otherwise, they're going to ignore the job. And an event has to have a date, for example. So, some really simple stuff, but some of the things that you might not have thought about. And then the second way of verifying schema is using Search Console. So ensuring that you are verified inside Search Console. If you then have a look at the enhancements area in Search Console, as Google indexes the schema, you'll start seeing more enhancements being populated inside Search Console. You can then dig into those and have a look at if there's any issues, whether they're valid or not, and really understand if you've achieved what you were hoping you were going to achieve in step one, which is working out which schema you're applying to which content, and step 3 enables you to actually see if that's worked or not.
And one other follow-up question in relation to verifying the implementation. Is it possible to also use software to identify other opportunities that you may have missed? So you may have correctly marked up the content that you intended to mark up, but what about identifying content that could be marked up, but you weren't aware that there was schema available for that?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to that, although to feed into that, you can run a tool like Screaming Frog on the site, which will analyze the entire site from a schematic point of view and put the whole thing into what may as well be called an Excel sheet to make it really really easy to understand what you've implemented. In terms of opportunity, I think that's a really good question. I don't know if I know the answer to that, and because I think maybe there is an answer, but I'd struggle to understand how it would work, because the reason schema's been built is, how does a robot know what that content's about? So, it's obvious to us looking at a recipe that we can understand as a human. We can see the ingredients, we can see the cook time, we can see the picture of the title of the dish. But is that obvious to a human? And so, I'm skeptical as to how good software could be doing that.
Okay, great. Well, if you're listening to this and you're on Twitter, @RankRanger, if you've got any thoughts in relation to that, what tool would you use to identify what content specifically you should be marking up with schema? Bringing us up to number 4, and that is measure success.
Yeah, sure. So in terms of measuring success, that's around understanding the key metrics that schema can have an impact on. And one of the, going back to what we talked about right at the beginning, search engine journals saying that, there's not a direct correlation in terms of a rank, but there is a direct correlation in terms of, for example, a review snippet, or, for example, an FAQ snippet. Now, how can you then not say that you're not getting more impressions, more click-throughs? Well, of course you are. And so as you then drive more clicks, more impressions, you get more engagement on the site. That, of course, is going to have an impact on the ranks. But going back to how you measure this, so it's what are the key metrics? So the key metrics of in back to basics on SEO would be things like ranks, things like impressions, things like impression share, more importantly, and things like click-through rate. So a lot of that data is available in Search Console. But certainly using, for example, SEMrush as well, to be able to look at traffic rank share, and to be able to look at impression share, and getting a sort of a wider picture. So it's about analysing the results, and having implemented schema on many sites, what I can absolutely say again against Search Engine Journal is that I've not seen a single site where the impressions haven't increased quite dramatically from simply implementing some basic schema.
So let's finish off with
the Pareto Pickle.
So Pareto says you can get 80% of your results from 20% of your efforts. So what's one SEO activity you would recommend that provides incredible results for modest levels of effort?
Well, I guess I've got to say schema. However, moving away from schema just for now, I think it's real back to basics. And some people listening, or watching this might, think this is a bit old hat. But keywords, I think just really understanding your audience, understanding what they are actually typing into Google, and make sure that you implement that phrase, that particular keyword in the right position on your page. So, are you using it in basics? Are you using it in the URL? Are you using it in the headline? Is it marked up as a H1? Are you using it in the subheadings? And I'm not talking about keyword stuffing. I'm just talking about some real common sense. Do you want to be found for a particular thing? Make sure you're bloody talking about it.
Great thoughts. And it's very easy to get wrapped up in the latest SEO tech thing, be it Schema or be it JavaScript or something else that sounds exciting and interesting. But I guess if you're not incorporating keywords in your on-page content, you ain't going to be ranking for much.
Yeah, and the thing is that you think of a keyword, but have you actually thought of how a user might the language that the user might use, and that's the key thing that is often overlooked.
Superb stuff. Well, I've been your host, David Bain. You can find Jonny Ross over at fleek.marketing. Jonny, thanks so much for being on the In Search SEO podcast.
It's been delightful. Thank you.
And thank you for listening. Check out all the previous episodes and sign up for a free trial of the Rank Ranger platform over at rankranger.com.